I have some great news to share out of Papua New Guinea. We have now 2 new marine protected areas in Papua New Guinea spanning 16,000 square kilometers. That's equal to 1.5 million hectares. This is probably one of the largest MPAs done, not only just as NPAs, but done with a community-led process. It took 7 years, so we're going to talk about everything that happened on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And action we are taking worldwide. There's a new article out of the newsroom from the Wildlife Conservation Society saying Papua New Guinea triples ocean protection, announcing 2 new marine protected areas. So Papua New Guinea today announced, and this is as of November 12th, so just yesterday, or when I'm recording this, announced more than 16,000 square kilometers of new marine protected areas in New Ireland province. The process that led to the massive community-led protection took nearly 7 years and involved more than 9,000 people from over 100 indigenous communities. That is probably the largest community-led marine protected area process that's ever been done. And the 2 new nearshore MPAs, which are marine protected areas, are a major win for Papua New Guinea, indigenous peoples, and critically endangered sharks, rays, and turtles, a model of community and government partnership on the road to achieve the global 30 by 30 target, which was set in 2022. So the article I'm going to link to in the show notes. So if you're looking at your app and you want to go to that article, you can go and get more information, because I probably won't be able to cover everything that's in the article. It's a great article that's written out. But this is a huge win. Anytime we're able to put a marine protected area or 2 new marine protected areas in, especially from an indigenous-led and community-led process. That is probably the biggest part. 9,000 people from upwards of 100 different communities had a voice in the process. Now, this process took 7 years. These marine protected areas are not just done overnight. I think that's one of the drawbacks of marine protected areas for the most part, is that it takes a long time, especially when you're including a lot of different communities. I know, for instance, in Canada, it took at least 2 years to put a marine spatial plan together in the province of BC, because there are a lot of indigenous groups within there. There are a lot of different nations that have not maybe dissimilar values. They know each other, but they have different cultural values. And so they want to make sure that all their cultural values are being met within this marine spatial plan. And I'm sure the same thing goes for, or I can assume that the same thing goes for these 100 different communities that are within the area. So it takes a long time to build up those relationships. I'm sure, the government indigenous relationship is now a lot better than it was before, but you're obviously seeing this partnership, which is great. Now, this was a partnership between indigenous peoples, national government authorities, and the local nonprofits, including World Wildlife Conservation Society, WCS, which has an office in Papua New Guinea, Aylan Awareness Inc., and Loliang Sustainable Program. So there's a lot of things that go on within this article, but essentially what happens is here's a quote from Kay Kalem, the Director of Sustainable Environment Programs at the Conservation and Environment Protection Authority. And Kay said, "These declarations are a result of major conservation commitments from the government of Papua New Guinea at the 5th International Our Ocean Conference in Bali in 2018. Where we promised to develop 7,500 square kilometers of MPAs in New Ireland province, and they essentially more than doubled that, which is great. With this announcement, we are very grateful to the people of Murat and Lovengai LLG and the people of New Ireland province and its government for ensuring that we delivered on this commitment." So this commitment's in place. I don't know how long it takes to put into place, but it will be put into place fairly shortly if it hasn't already, which I think is really great. So the 2 new MPAs include the country's first ever rules protecting sawfish and their relatives, the critically endangered rhino rays, which are basically flat sharks, shark rays, basically, as we call them, flat sharks, as Dr. Dave Eber calls them on my Beyond Jaws podcast, co-host of the Beyond Jaws podcast, making these also the first MPAs in the world with specific measures designed to protect the most threatened groups of sharks and rays. So another big feat here. The Murat MPA includes full protection for marine turtles, dugongs, whales, dolphins, and in 5 of the 6 wards, all other shark and ray species. Rules and details were agreed upon across dozens of communities, languages, and cultures. This is huge. When we talk about decolonizing conservation, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a community-led process. We're talking about over different cultures, different languages. Everybody has their say. It takes longer, and there's probably a lot of conflict resolution that has to go on, but these are made, and now they're going to be protected for a long time, and they're going to be abided, which I think is a huge thing. When people believe in this, they're part of that process, they put a lot of work into it, and they want to make sure that they see this thing through. So the work of establishing the Murat MPA was not an easy task for all of us, the people of Murat and WCS and stakeholders, said Nixon Namalo, the Marine Environment Management Committee chair of the Murat Marine Protected Area. Today shows the great achievement of everyone's efforts, and he wants to thank everyone. So the 30 by 30 commits governments to protecting and conserving at least 30% of the Earth's land, inland waters, and seas by 2030. It's a big thing over the next 7 years, right, that people have to do that. So they've tripled their amount. And now in Papua New Guinea, the challenge is that 97% of the land in coastal regions are in some form of customary tenure, which means that the indigenous peoples have rights and say over their lands and seas. This was said by Tracy Boslago, a marine conservation officer for WCS Papua New Guinea. She goes on to say the new marine protected areas of Lavonge and Murat LLGs were established through community input and consensus, both components of the free, prior, and informed consent process. This provides a yardstick for equitable marine management in Papua New Guinea and beyond. So now the country moves to doing something different. That's designing funding streams and climate-smart management structures that will keep the 2 MPAs running sustainably for the benefits of biodiversity and people for decades. Now, this is the big challenge. Like we've had one hurdle that we've come up. We got 2 MPAs out of this process, a 7-year long process. Over 100 indigenous communities, 9,000 people involved. And they got them established. Now it's maintaining them and funding them to make sure that they can be protected and paying people to look after them and do the monitoring and all that kind of stuff, right? And so that's where the funding models have been changing. And we did this, we talked about this with Conservation International as well as the island of Niue when we had them on the podcast, and we said, hey, there's these things that we call ocean conservation commitments, these OCCs. And these OCCs, people can support and provide money to support the marine protected area, a square kilometer of the marine protected area, for 20 years plus. So now they have a funding model to work with. Hopefully that will work out. That worked out in Island of Niue. I have to get an update. But then we'll, and see that spread, that type of model for funding model spread where people, you and I, can support or donate money towards that support, so people in the province of New Ireland will be able to look after this. The community will be able to look after these MPAs properly with funding, and they can dedicate the proper resources that will go into this. This has been a huge problem in the past. I really love this type of model. It doesn't say in this article that the model will be used. However, I think it's a perfect opportunity to use this, and I hope it gets shared, hopefully through this podcast as one medium, but I hope that it gets shared to other organizations such as WCS, World Conservation Society, and because it's such an important model. It's such a model that brings it down to the people, it democratizes who or what you want to support. If you're somebody who feels frustrated and you can't support, or you feel frustrated for not supporting these big initiatives, or you don't think you can, maybe you'll be able to. And maybe that model of contributing to ocean conservation commitments, OCCs, will provide you with that ability to support that type of initiative, that type of MPA, instead of depending on the World Bank or another large funding organization that a lot of times will fund these things, but you never hear anything of. There's a perfect opportunity in the times that we're in the technology that we have, to update people. Like, think of like something like Patreon, where you can update people on how well the MPA is being supported, how well it's being managed. If you're supporting something, you want to know how well it's being managed. You want to know, to make sure that the work is going into the square kilometer or a couple square kilometers that you purchase, or not purchase, sorry, that you're supporting, to be able to see how this is doing. I think it's a perfect opportunity to get conservation out there, to provide hope for people. And I would love to see the OCC model of conservation being done for this. Hopefully that can happen. Now, there's a lot of trust that needs to happen. I'm sure a lot of fail safes and reporting that needs to be done with this kind of stuff, and we're going to see how it does in the island of Niue, and see how people feel about supporting the initiative, and to see what happens after that. It'll be really interesting to see, but I'm very supportive of this kind of thing. I'm very optimistic of this type of conservation. But lo and behold, we got 2 new marine protected areas in the world, in Papua New Guinea, where there's a lot of different critical species. We have a lot of biodiversity within that area of the world, and now it's going to be protected, it's going to be managed, and we're going to see some great protection out of that, and getting closer and closer to our goal of 30 by 30. Now, we're still far away from it, but countries are working hard to do this. And if a 7-year process is what it takes, a 7-year process is what we're going to do. And if it takes longer, that's fine. But as long as we're on that road to prosperity and making sure that we get the 30 by 30, at the very least. So I'd love to hear your comments on this. What do you think of the OCC business model, the Ocean Conservation Commitments of that business model? I'll put the link to that podcast, that episode, for you to listen to if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, if you're new to this podcast. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. You can hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. And I would love to hear what you think of the show by leaving a comment or a rating and review. I would love to hear that. It helps other people who are new to the show, who are searching up things about the ocean, kind of get an idea of why you listen to the podcast and why they should listen to the podcast. So as you're filling out that rating and review, please, feel free to put down, this is why I listen to the podcast, because I get ocean news, or I get, talks about, communication or action and all that kind of stuff, or all of it together. Whatever you decide is important to you, why you listen to this podcast, why you listen to the episodes 3 times a week or 2 times a week or once a week. Feel free to share that. I would love for other people to be able to get that same experience, or know that's the experience you get with this podcast. So share do your ratings and reviews on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcast app if they allow it. And I would love to hear what you have to say. So just hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, and let me know. Take a screen grab of what you put down as your rating and review, and I would love to see it. I don't take offense if you don't love it. No worries. I just want other people to know what to expect, what they can expect based on your feedback of listening to this podcast. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode and for the rest of the episodes. Really appreciate it. This has been another episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.